What if everything Meghan Markle thought she controlled, her image, her narrative, her future, was about to be ripped out of her hands? What if, right now, as you're watching this, a classified memo from Buckingham Palace is being passed behind closed doors, a memo designed to permanently end Meghan's ability to profit from her royal title? Sounds far-fetched? Think again. Because according to multiple well-placed insiders, the palace is no longer playing games. They've had enough. And this time, they're coming with a vengeance. The public doesn't know it yet, but within the gates of Windsor Castle, a dramatic power move has quietly been put into motion. The Queen may be gone, but the monarchy's grip is tightening, and Meghan Markle, whether she's in Montecito or Manhattan, is about to find herself shackled by a new set of rules she never saw coming. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Rules that strip away more than just her royal styling. Rules that could obliterate the entire Sussex brand. So here's the real question. Why now? Why, after years of silence, years of carefully avoiding open confrontation, is the palace choosing this exact moment to clamp down? Is it about protecting the dignity of the crown? Or is it revenge? Because according to new reports, this wasn't just about a name, a title, or a crest. This was personal, and it didn't begin with a press release. It began with a look, a whisper, a decision made in a sunlit room with antique furniture and ancient oil paintings. A decision that would change the course of Meghan Markle's royal future, forever. Now, before we dive into the avalanche of leaked details, you need to understand what was really happening behind the scenes. Because while the world was watching Meghan make podcast deals, attend Hollywood galas, and stroll red carpets in gowns worthy of a queen, something else was brewing. Behind the scenes, palace aides were monitoring, watching, taking notes. Every time she used her Duchess title in public. Every time a new brand emerged wrapped in royal gloss. Every time she made it look like she was still an official part of the royal family. It wasn't about fashion. It wasn't about envy. It was about power, and Meghan's refusal to let it go. And to some within the institution, that was unforgivable. You see, the British monarchy isn't built on feelings. It's built on precedent, control, and image. And when someone starts twisting the rules for personal gain, it becomes a threat to the entire foundation. That's how they saw her. Not as a victim, not as an exile, but as a dangerous symbol of rebellion, wrapped in luxury and press attention, reaching millions. And then came the straw that broke the crown. It wasn't loud. It wasn't viral. But it was calculated, and Meghan didn't even realize it was the final line. According to royal sources, it was a combination of several things. A recent high-profile interview where Meghan casually dropped the Duchess of Sussex while promoting her lifestyle brand. A Netflix teaser where her royal past was highlighted without clarification. A product launch that referenced royal elegance as a brand identity. To us, innocuous. Branding. To them, a legal landmine. And just like that, the wheels started turning. But the most chilling part? They didn't warn her. There was no press conference, no public complaint, no polite letter. The palace went silent and started writing. Inside a gilded chamber, under the watch of advisors who've served 3 monarchs, a plan was formed. A confidential protocol that would make it nearly impossible for Meghan to legally, publicly, or commercially benefit from her royal association ever again. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't about removing a title in name only. This is about locking down the very idea of royalty and cutting off any outsider from claiming a slice of its power. Because the crown has learned something from Meghan's rise. They saw what happened when a modern woman with charm, charisma, and global appeal entered their centuries-old system, and then walked away. They saw how easily she built an empire using the very tools they gave her. And now, they want those tools back. Or, at the very least, they want to make sure no one else gets to use them again. So how does this work? Can they really stop her? Does international law even support that? Can Meghan still call herself Duchess in California? Or will the threat of this new royal protocol force her to abandon the one thing that's tied her to global fame since 2018? That's the mystery. And it gets darker. Because, in this exposé, we'll uncover the explosive internal memo allegedly circulating within royal legal teams. Why King Charles personally approved the new protocols, and what that says about his true feelings toward Meghan. How Princess Anne, of all people, may have led the charge for tougher title restrictions. What Meghan's reaction was when she got wind of the plan, and why, according to insiders, she was left trembling and furious. The Hollywood fallout already beginning as brand partners reevaluate their associations. And most chilling of all, why this may just be part one of a much larger palace revenge campaign. But here's the twist. Even though Meghan's team has already begun pushing back behind the scenes, it might be too late. Because in the next 48 hours, if sources are to be believed, the palace will make their position public. And when they do, when that press release drops, the world will have no choice but to ask, is this the end of the Sussex brand as we know it? Or is this just the beginning of an even more dangerous war, a war of perception, of influence, and of legacy? So before you jump to conclusions, remember this. The monarchy doesn't move fast, but when it does, it never, ever fires blanks. And this time, the shot is aimed directly at Meghan Markle. But what Meghan didn't know, what no one in Hollywood or Montecito expected, was just how deep this plan goes. Because this isn't just about titles. It's about betrayal. And the first act of that betrayal is about to come from someone she trusted the most. What kind of action forces the British royal family, an institution built on restraint, tradition, and deliberate silence, to finally bare its teeth? What line does someone like Meghan Markle have to cross for the palace to decide it's time to go to war? Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a gentle nudge or quiet disapproval. This was a trigger moment, and it didn't happen overnight. It was building, bubbling, behind the palace walls, across Montecito dining rooms, inside contract meetings, PR strategy calls, Netflix boardrooms, until it finally exploded. So what was the spark? Let's go back. Not years, just weeks. On the surface, it seemed harmless. Another high-profile public appearance. Another empowering speech. Another elegant ensemble, photo-ready, flashing smiles and headlines. But beneath the surface, that's where it all went wrong. Because Meghan Markle, intentionally or not, referred to herself once again as the Duchess of Sussex, not in passing, not casually, but as a core part of her promotional identity during a high-visibility U.S. campaign tied to her lifestyle brand and upcoming media rollout. And this time, she didn't just say it. She printed it. She branded it. She led with it. Brochures, digital invites, promotional banners, subtle touches in social media bios, even stylized merchandise rumors. The full royal aesthetic, soft crests, crowns, the faint silhouette of Windsor behind designer font overlays, was back. But this wasn't just nostalgia. It was business. This appearance wasn't about the charity circuit. It wasn't about mental health awareness. This was monetized. Part of a deliberate rebrand, aimed at positioning Meghan's future projects with the prestige of royalty without the restrictions that come with it. To the casual observer, elegant, on-brand, inspirational. To Buckingham Palace, a nuclear violation. Because here's the brutal truth. Once you walk away from the inner sanctum of the royal family, once you say no to protocol, pageantry, and public funding, you lose access to the royal machinery. You're out. Titles may stay on paper, yes. But using them publicly, especially for private commercial gain, that's a no-go, a red line. And this wasn't the first time, but it was the last straw. Because this time, Meghan wasn't just seen as playing the system. She was seen as mocking it. Think about the timeline. Just weeks before, King Charles had extended a carefully worded olive branch, allegedly inviting the Sussexes to consider a low-key royal holiday visit, with no cameras, no press, no drama. A chance to reset. But then, while negotiations were still allegedly being hashed out, this happened. A bold reemergence of Duchess Meghan, fully capitalized, stylized, and commercially activated. And the reaction inside the palace? Cold fury. Behind closed doors, the Queen's former aides reportedly exchanged knowing glances. Princess Anne, never one to suffer fools or PR stunts, allegedly warned that the line's been crossed again. Even Prince William, who stayed publicly silent, was, according to one royal source, so done. And yet, the most telling response came not from words, but silence. No public rebuttal, no correction, no legal threat, not yet. Instead, a meeting, a very private, Very high-level meeting. Inside the palace, senior aides, legal counsel, and the king himself allegedly gathered to discuss what to do. And this time, they weren't interested in diplomacy. Because Meghan's latest move wasn't just irritating. It was dangerous. Why? Because it signaled that she had no intention of backing down. No intention of slowly retreating from the limelight. No interest in keeping the royal identity separate from her business interests. In short, the palace feared Meghan was positioning herself not just as a former royal, but as an independent, Americanized version of royalty itself. A hybrid. One with press access, political connections, and global media sympathy, but none of the controls that apply to working royals. That, to them, was a crisis waiting to happen. And what triggered it? One event, one photo op, one string of stylized press materials, one choice to lean in, again, to the title of Duchess. But it's not just the title. Let's get that straight. It's the power the title implies. And when Meghan uses it to market, endorse, or validate projects, it blurs the line between monarchy and money. That's the danger. Because the palace isn't just protecting a name. They're protecting the crown's very legitimacy. If it becomes routine for ex-royals to use their titles in public-facing brand campaigns, where does it stop? Tomorrow, a TikTok royal? Next week, Duke of Sussex skincare? A year from now, Princess Lilibet Presents, the Royal Lifestyle Network. That's how the palace sees it. A slippery slope that starts with one more appearance and ends with the total commodification of royalty. And Meghan, whether knowingly or not, was heading straight down that path, cameras blazing. So the palace began preparing a response. And here's where it gets chilling. According to one London-based royal staffer, a man with years inside Clarence House, the king's response was 3 words. Enough. Draft it. What was being drafted? Not a public letter. Not a formal rebuke. A protocol document. One that would lay out, in unprecedented detail, what ex-royals, especially Meghan, can and cannot do with their titles, names, and royal affiliations when appearing in the public domain. It would be subtle, sophisticated, legally worded with plausible deniability. But its meaning? Crystal clear. You are no longer one of us. And from this moment forward, we will ensure the world knows it. Now here's the kicker. Meghan didn't know any of this was happening. At least, not at first. She had just returned to California. The media was buzzing about her glamorous speech. Her team was reviewing analytics. Strategists were celebrating another successful rollout. But back in London, a hammer was quietly being forged. And when it dropped, everything would change. Because Meghan's single use of Duchess of Sussex, paired with commercial branding, media optics, and calculated PR, was no longer viewed as a harmless slip. It was viewed as a threat. And threats, in the royal ecosystem, are dealt with swiftly and silently. But even then, even as the palace began finalizing its internal protocol, there was one more twist. A twist that turned the spark into a wildfire. And it didn't come from Meghan. It came from someone close to her. Someone who, according to reports, had seen the palace's draft response before Meghan did. Someone who made a call. Not to Meghan, not to her team, but to a tabloid. And within 72 hours, the first whispers hit the press. Senior royals preparing to clamp down on Sussexes' use of titles. It was vague. It was carefully worded. But it was very, very real. And Meghan? She had no idea. Not yet. But she would soon. Because inside her Montecito home, an envelope was on its way. A private, hand-delivered communication. No headlines. No leaks. Just a quiet warning. And when Meghan opened it, everything would shift. The tremble, the panic, the chaos. It would all begin with what she read in that letter. But it wasn't the first line that shook her. It was what was buried deep in the middle. A clause so specific, so brutal, so final, that even her lawyers reportedly froze when they saw it. So what was it? What could the palace possibly include in a private memo that left Meghan Markle, a global icon, a media strategist, a former actress with skin thicker than most, trembling in fear? The answer is more dangerous than you think. And it would lead directly to the secret internal memo that Buckingham Palace never wanted the public to see. What does it look like when Buckingham Palace wages war? No soldiers, no swords, no shouting from the balcony. Instead, it begins with silence. Cold, controlled, calculated. And then, Paper. Because the monarchy doesn't swing wildly. It moves with precision. And when they decide to strike, their weapon of choice isn't chaos, it's protocol. So, what was in the memo that allegedly left Meghan Markle visibly shaken, according to one anonymous insider? What words could send someone with her media power base, global platform, and inner circle support into a panic spiral so severe? Her legal team allegedly scheduled emergency calls within the hour. We start not with the memo itself, but with the room it was born in. A room so steeped in tradition it barely feels real. Sunlight through ancient windows. The faint smell of leather-bound archives. Oil portraits of monarchs who've ruled empires, stared down revolutions, and silenced scandals that would make modern tabloids blush. And seated at the table? Not politicians, not celebrities, but the real operators, the men in gray suits. The keepers of the crown. Some have worked for the firm longer than Meghan has been alive. They don't speak in headlines. They speak in strategy. And when the Meghan Markle Duchess branding situation resurfaced again, after years of careful neutrality, their patience snapped. Not publicly, not with dramatic statements. They did what they've always done when a threat emerges. They documented, they organized, and then they escalated. Now, here's where it gets serious. According to one deeply embedded palace source, the first draft of the memo was quietly titled, Protocol Adjustment, External Styling and Title Usage Clarification. 2025 Revision. Dry, right? But inside, nuclear. The memo, which reportedly stretched over 14 pages, was divided into 3 core sections. Legal precedents governing title usage post-exit. Public misrepresentation and commercial exploitation of royal branding. Proposed restrictions, enforcement strategies, and external communication guidelines. Let's break that down. Because the phrasing may be diplomatic, but the intent? It couldn't be clearer. This was a coordinated effort to box Meghan in permanently, to draw a thick legal line between her and any usage of royal prestige in her personal branding, endorsements, appearances, and projects. And it wasn't just theoretical. The memo cited specific examples, all allegedly gathered over the course of the last year. That's right. While Meghan thought the palace had moved on, they had been keeping receipts. Photos, social media screenshots, product tie-ins, PR rollout language, copyright filings, everything. Because here's the brutal truth no one in Meghan's camp wanted to admit. The palace doesn't forget. It waits. And when the moment arrives, it strikes quietly with documents like this. Now, let's talk about the core enforcement strategy, because that's where the true weight of the monarchy revealed itself. According to sources familiar with the memo, one clause in particular sent shockwaves through Meghan's legal team. It read, any further deployment of titles associated with the British Crown in commercial endeavors, promotional content, or international appearances by individuals no longer in active service may constitute grounds for coordinated rebuttal, restriction, and, where applicable, cross-jurisdictional enforcement. Sounds vague? Not when paired with the next part. Because attached to the memo were sealed letters, intended for dissemination, if necessary, to major PR firms operating in the UK and US, international media outlets, trademark offices in select jurisdictions, royal warrant holders and charity patrons, government contacts within the Commonwealth. Why? To officially communicate the Crown's stance, to create institutional pressure, to signal, without ever having to sue, that continuing to platform Meghan's use of Duchess could be seen as a violation of protocol and misalignment with the monarchy. It's the kind of move that doesn't make headlines immediately, but changes everything behind the scenes, because it whispers in boardrooms. It speaks through silence at contract negotiations, and it echoes in branding meetings when a Hollywood exec quietly asks, wait, are we allowed to say Duchess on the poster? That's how the monarchy fights. No shouting, just sudden silence. Now, remember the timeline. When this memo was drafted, Meghan was still unaware. Her latest branding campaign was soaring. Social media was ablaze. Photos from her event were trending. Fan accounts were praising her elegance and poise. But across the Atlantic, palace staff were printing pages, highlighting passages, planning deployment. And then came the leak. According to a report from a mid-level insider at a well-known tabloid, a mysterious source, using a burner email and encrypted file link, sent over a summary version of the memo just days after its drafting. It was partial, sanitized, no names, no direct threats. But it was enough to confirm the story. The palace was preparing to restrict Meghan Markle's use of her royal title. And once that whisper hit the media, Meghan's world began to tilt. Because this time, it wasn't just Twitter trolls or royal biographers throwing shade. It was institutional, concrete, coordinated, unignorable. Her team scrambled. Damage control began. Phone calls, Zooms, press outreach, legal strategy. But the core fear lingered. If the palace had gone this far in private, what were they planning to do in public? And then it arrived. A letter, discreet envelope, crest embossed, delivered not by courier, not by U.S. mail, but hand-delivered through diplomatic channels. Inside, the full protocol memo. No ambiguity, no cushion, just a calmly worded declaration that from this point forward, Meghan was expected to cease referring to herself as the Duchess of Sussex in promotional materials, press content, or merchandising. All third-party platforms and publications referencing her title were to be encouraged to include disclaimers noting her non-active status. Any future violations may lead to formal communication with national authorities, legal avenues under intellectual property restrictions, and, where applicable, media corrections. Now imagine being Meghan in that moment, reading line after line, and realizing that the institution she thought she had outplayed hadn't forgotten a thing. Worse, it had been watching, waiting, plotting, and now it was ready to erase her from its public narrative. Not with scandal, not with speeches, but with red tape. Because here's what no one tells you about the royal family. It doesn't matter if the public loves you. It doesn't matter if you have 10 million followers. It doesn't matter if you trend on TikTok or host celebrity dinner parties. If you violate the unwritten laws of the monarchy, the crown doesn't argue. It redefines you. Legally, publicly, permanently. And that's what this memo was. A redefinition. A line in the sand that told the world. Meghan Markle is no longer Her Royal Highness. She is no longer the Duchess of Sussex. And anyone who pretends otherwise is part of the problem. It was brutal, and it worked. Because within hours of the memo being received, Meghan's media team allegedly pulled multiple scheduled posts, paused an ongoing rollout, and sent internal notices advising partners to hold branding language for review. Some called it damage control, others, panic. But Meghan wasn't just reacting to PR. She was reacting to betrayal. Because someone in her world, someone with access, had warned the palace ahead of time. And now, that person was preparing to go public. But who was it? A former aide? A jilted advisor? A palace mole? No, it was someone she never suspected. Someone she trusted with access to her schedules, her team, her materials. And their betrayal would reveal even more than the memo. Because while the palace had dropped a hammer, the real chaos was still to come. And it would begin with just 2 words. She knew. How does a woman who's mastered the media, who's outmaneuvered palace press teams, reshaped her image across continents, and turned exile into empire, react when it all starts to slip? Not slowly, not with rumors, but with a single, official letter. Cold, legal, final. Because on that day in Montecito, when Meghan Markle received the memo from Buckingham Palace, something changed. Not in public, not right away, but inside. The cracks began, and it started the moment she opened the envelope. It was late morning. California sun pouring through the windows. The house was quiet, at least at first. An assistant had handed it to her, confused. No markings, no name on the front. Just the unmistakable royal seal. Deep red wax pressed perfectly, the shape of the crown shimmering faintly in the light. Meghan turned it over, cautious. Maybe curious. Maybe already suspicious. After all, she knew the palace had been silent for too long. She'd seen the headlines, heard the whispers, royal insiders concerned. King Charles increasingly frustrated. New restrictions possible, but headlines were easy. She'd survived worse. This, however, this was personal. She opened the letter, unfolded the thick, official parchment, read the first few lines, and froze. Because it wasn't a warning. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration. A list of limitations, responsibilities, and consequences. Each line more suffocating than the last. A carefully composed mandate that made one thing painfully clear. The palace wasn't asking. They were telling. And the emotional reaction? Immediate. According to a source allegedly close to her Montecito circle, Meghan's face went white. Not with rage, not at first, but shock, as if she'd been blindsided. Like the floor had shifted underneath her, and no one had told her she'd been standing on a trapdoor. She whispered something, the source couldn't hear what, then slowly sat down at the kitchen island, letter still in her hand, not blinking. And then came the rage. Phones were picked up, calls placed, legal counsel summoned. What is this? She demanded. Who authorized this? Can they even do this? But deep down, she knew the answer. Yes, they could, and they had. And that's when the panic started. Because what the palace had done, cleverly, cruelly, was not just send a memo. They timed it. According to multiple reports, the protocol letter had arrived just days before Meghan was set to begin the next stage of a major media rollout. One that involved a new brand refresh, a product soft launch, and several surprise cameos lined up across social media and strategic PR platforms. And every single one of those appearances, packaged with the title Duchess of Sussex. Every single one. Now, with the memo in hand, all of it was compromised. All of it had to be reviewed. Possibly redone. In some cases, completely scrapped. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was catastrophic. Imagine spending months orchestrating a comeback, only to have the core piece of your identity ripped away at the last minute. No warning, no negotiation, just silence, and then the axe. But here's where it gets darker. Because as Meghan's team scrambled to assess the damage, someone else in the house, someone in the background, was watching. They'd seen the letter too, read it, absorbed its implications, and they were already planning their next move. Because if Meghan was going down, they weren't going down with her. Allegedly, this individual, an advisor with access to confidential branding plans, began leaking. Quietly, anonymously, strategically. They didn't go to the tabloids. Not right away. They went to someone safer. A contact, a whisper chain, and within hours, the leak began to spread. Meghan Markle in crisis mode after palace sends official letter restricting title usage. It wasn't even on page 1 yet. Just quiet headlines. Online-only blurbs. Royal beat journalists sniffing the air. But Meghan? She felt it instantly. The control was slipping. And when you've built your post-royal life on the illusion of narrative dominance, when every press cycle, every lens, every caption is calibrated, losing that grip is terrifying. Because if she couldn't use the title, what was left? A name? A reputation? A controversy? That's not a brand. That's a liability. She paced. According to a second insider, allegedly a former staffer still loosely tied to her business operations, Meghan spent most of the afternoon in intense back-to-back calls, toggling between advisors, legal experts, and media strategists. The key questions were simple, but brutal. Could she challenge the memo in court? Could she ignore it without retaliation? Could she use proxies? Friends, fans, third-party influencers, to keep the Duchess' identity alive without technical violation? Every answer led to a dead end. Because the memo didn't just outline rules. It came with teeth. Specifically, a clause allegedly stating that continued misuse could trigger legal notifications to foreign governments, direct appeals to PR agencies and platforms, trademark disputes in international courts, and worst of all, formal disavowal by the crown. That last one. That's the death sentence. Because once the monarchy publicly declares that someone's use of a royal title is unauthorized or misleading, it sends a message to the entire media ecosystem, one that even the most loyal platforms won't ignore. And Meghan knew it. Which is why, according to yet another Montecito source, she was visibly distressed by the early evening, walking through the house, repeating the phrase, "They're trying to erase me." Think about that for a second. Not block her, not criticize her, erase her from the royal story, from the title she built her post-royal empire around, from the very institution that gave her the spotlight in the first place. And that fear? That wasn't paranoia. It was rooted in reality. Because the memo, by design, wasn't just about restriction. It was about redefining Meghan Markle in the eyes of the world. Not as a duchess, not as a working royal, but as a private citizen, legally barred from capitalizing on the crown. It was devastating. And yet, Meghan wasn't defeated. Not yet. Because as the sun set over Montecito that day, and the leaked headlines began trickling into the UK press cycle, she made a decision. She wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. According to someone close to her inner circle, Meghan was already drafting a response. Not a direct letter. Not a legal challenge. But a public move. A statement. Something emotional, carefully worded, and most of all, strategically timed. Because if the palace wanted to strip her of her title in silence, Meghan would make the world watch. But as she began preparing her next move, consulting her Hollywood connections, her PR team, and her global media allies, she didn't realize one thing. Someone on the inside was still leaking. And the next story that would break? It wouldn't come from her. It would come from London. And this time, it wouldn't just mention a memo. It would name names. It would cite dates. And it would expose a second, even more explosive clause hidden in the palace's plan. A clause Meghan never saw coming. And when it surfaced, it wouldn't just shake her brand. It would threaten to pull her children into the crossfire. What if the most dangerous part of the palace's secret memo wasn't about Meghan at all? What if it was about her children? Because deep inside that protocol document, buried in formal language, footnotes, and historical precedent, was one clause so incendiary, so chilling, that even Meghan's most hardened legal experts allegedly paused. A clause not meant for headlines. A clause not even leaked in the initial round. But when it surfaced, quietly, through a second source in London, it ignited a firestorm. This wasn't just about the Duchess of Sussex title. This was about Archie and Lilibet. And suddenly, what had once been a media war became something far more personal. Let's back up. In the hours after Meghan received the letter, her team had gone into crisis mode. They'd dissected the language, sought international legal advice, brainstormed public responses. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by strategy. But then came a call. From London. A journalist. Connected. Careful. He wasn't asking questions. He was issuing a warning. You might want to take a second look at Clause 7.3. Paragraph 2. At first, Meghan's team didn't understand. They had already reviewed the document extensively. But upon opening the file and scrolling to the back, the part most had skimmed, thinking it contained little more than ceremonial filler, there it was. One paragraph. 48 words. Enough to threaten everything Meghan had tried to protect since 2020. The clause allegedly stated, any person born of royal lineage who is not in active engagement with the duties and responsibilities of the crown, and whose representation is perceived to exploit royal status in a manner contrary to the interests of the monarchy, may be subject to revised styling in future official contexts, including but not limited to title reference in the court's circular, parliamentary registers, and diplomatic engagement. Now, on the surface, that might sound vague. But the implications? Devastating. Because this wasn't just about Meghan. This was about Archie and Lilibet's titles. And not the honorary ones the public debates on Twitter, but the ones that impact how they are seen in historical archives, diplomatic protocol, royal succession listings, and future UK appearances. Translation? The palace was preparing the groundwork to revoke the formal styling of prince and princess from Meghan's children. Not by stripping them outright, but by gradually erasing their inclusion from official royal records. No announcement. No public drama. Just deletion. Over time. Quietly. Formally. And Meghan? She was furious. Not just because of what the clause said, but because she hadn't seen it coming. According to a Montecito-based insider with knowledge of the fallout, Meghan allegedly slammed her hand on the table and said, "They're punishing my children for being born to me." That's the emotional dagger. Because no matter how controversial Meghan has been, no matter how critics have painted her, she's always positioned herself publicly as a protective mother. A mother who once claimed the palace refused to give Archie a title because of race. A mother who tearfully told Oprah that safety and dignity were denied to her son. And now? Now the palace was using bureaucratic fine print to remove her children from the history books. Not overnight. Not all at once. But over time, quietly editing them out of relevance. And it was happening in real time. Already, eagle-eyed royal watchers had begun to notice odd patterns. Archie and Lilibet's names were inconsistently listed on the royal family website. Mentions in the court circular, the official record of royal events, were practically non-existent. Commonwealth offices abroad had allegedly received updated diplomatic charts omitting their stylings. Individually, those incidents seemed random. But in the context of Clause 7.3, it was clear the palace had been soft-launching their erasure for months, and the leaked memo only confirmed it. Now imagine being Meghan in that moment, realizing that the entire debate over her title had been a smokescreen, a distraction from the deeper move, targeting her legacy, her bloodline. Because here's the bitter irony. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, one of their public statements emphasized that their children would have the freedom to live a private life while still being connected to their heritage. But the palace? They took that as permission to cut the cord completely. And with Clause 7.3, they weren't just cutting it. They were lighting it on fire. But the palace wasn't finished. Sources close to King Charles suggest that this clause wasn't an afterthought. It was intentional, a warning, because behind the curtain, the palace had a concern that Meghan would eventually use Archie and Lilibet's royal status to further her branding empire. Not directly, but indirectly, through children's books, through philanthropic causes, through subtle nods to royal heritage in products, appearances, and speeches. And the palace knew that unless they moved now, before the children were old enough to take public roles, it would be too late. They had to shut it down, not with drama, with bureaucracy, which is what Clause 7.3 allowed them to do. Now here's the twist. This move didn't just anger Meghan. It reportedly caught Harry off guard, too. Up until this point, insiders say Harry had been reluctant to confront his father over the title issue. He had always hoped, perhaps naively, that family lines could be mended. But when he saw Clause 7.3, he snapped. According to a former palace employee who allegedly overheard a heated call between Harry and a senior royal aide, the Duke of Sussex said, "So now my kids are collateral damage?" That one sentence reportedly echoed through the palace walls for days. Because even the most loyal aides knew. This time, the fight wasn't just with Meghan. It was with both Sussexes. And the war had escalated. But Meghan? She was already planning her counterattack. Because she understood something the palace didn't expect. They might have controlled the titles, but she controlled the narrative. And that's when she began reaching out, not to lawyers, but to filmmakers. According to a source tied to a major streaming platform, Meghan's team quietly floated the idea of a documentary-style special, not about royalty, but about legacy, motherhood, and the unseen forces that shape the identities of modern children. Sound vague? That's the point. Because Meghan doesn't have to say the word palace to make her point. She doesn't have to mention Clause 7.3. All she has to do is frame herself as a mother fighting for her children's right to exist in their own story. And that, in the court of public opinion, might be the most powerful weapon of all. Because who will the public support? An ancient institution quietly erasing 2 children from royal records? Or a mother standing up, again, for her family? That's the battle the palace didn't anticipate. But it's one they're now forced to fight. Because Meghan's next move? It's already in production. And what comes next will hit them where it hurts most. Not in court, not in the press, but in the story the world remembers. And the person driving that story isn't wearing a crown. It's the woman they tried to erase. What happens when the battle isn't just between a duchess and a crown, but between a mother and an entire institution? What happens when the war over titles drags children into the battlefield? Because after the revelation of Clause 7.3, that obscure, buried paragraph in the palace's protocol memo, the world shifted for Meghan Markle. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about whether she could be called the Duchess of Sussex on red carpets, on podcast intros, or in magazine bylines. No, now, it was about Archie and Lilibet. And whether they would be allowed to carry the legacy they were born into, or be surgically removed from it, one line of protocol at a time. Let's make something very clear. The question of whether Harry and Meghan's children would be called Prince and Princess has been debated since before they were even born. At first, it was political. Then it became racial. Then it turned personal. And now? Now it's a full-blown diplomatic crisis hiding behind royal etiquette. Because the clause leaked in Chapter 4 didn't outright revoke Archie and Lilibet's titles. That would have caused a global uproar. Headlines, hashtags, op-eds from Washington to Windsor. No, the palace is smarter than that. Instead, It launched a quiet campaign of omission, a kind of bureaucratic suffocation. No announcements, no statements, just a slow, deliberate erasure from public-facing records, like shadows fading from a photograph. Here's how it works. First, the children's names are left out of formal royal communiques. No mention in birthday roundups, ceremonial listings, or official event briefings. Then, they're excluded from internal briefings to embassies abroad. Then, references to Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet are corrected, behind the scenes, by palace press officers who insist they are not using those titles in any official capacity. Now ask yourself, why? Why now, years after the Oprah interview? Why now, after months of silence? Because the palace was never interested in Meghan's podcast, or her fashion line, or her Spotify drama. They were watching something else. They were watching her brand her children. Let's talk about The Bench, Meghan's children's book. On the surface, a sweet tale, a dedication to her son, a celebration of fatherhood. But behind the scenes, a strategic move. The author's bio, the Duchess of Sussex. The imagery, deliberately echoing royal themes. The interviews, carefully peppered with references to my son, Prince Archie. This was no accident. It was a soft introduction, a test balloon. Could Meghan merge motherhood, royalty, and storytelling into a new empire? Could she build a platform where Archie and Lilibet weren't just royal footnotes, but icons of a modern, progressive, multicultural monarchy? To the world? Maybe. But to the palace? That was war. Because it wasn't just about branding. It was about ownership. In the eyes of the firm, titles are not accessories. They're tools of control. Status isn't just granted. It's licensed, managed, and withdrawn when misused. So when Meghan began softly promoting the idea of Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, not in a political context, but as a part of her content strategy, alarm bells went off. Suddenly, Clause 7.3 makes sense. Because if they didn't move fast, if they didn't define the boundaries now, Meghan would define them herself. And let's be honest, the monarchy doesn't like competition, especially not from California. But here's the human cost. Because while the palace drafts memos and Meghan plots responses, 2 children are at the center of this vortex. 2 toddlers, too young to understand the weight of a title, too innocent to grasp protocol, but old enough, soon enough, to ask questions. Questions like, why don't I get to be a prince? Why are we not in the pictures with the other cousins? Why does the world talk about us like we're different? And Meghan? She sees it coming. That's why, according to a source close to her inner circle, she has already begun documenting everything. Every letter, every revision, every leaked memo. Why? Because she's preparing a case. Not just for legal court, but for the court of public opinion. She wants the world to know what happened. That her children were not born into scandal, but into silence. That they were not denied titles by law, but by strategy. And this is where the emotional battle begins. Because on one hand, Meghan and Harry have said repeatedly that they don't care about titles, that they want a normal life for their children, that they value privacy over pageantry. But here's the contradiction, and it's important. Their entire public identity is built around the very titles they claim they don't need. They left the institution, yes, but they never stopped being the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Not on book covers, not on speaking tours, not in Netflix deals. So when they say, we don't want titles, but then protest when their children are denied them, it raises a question. Do they want freedom or recognition? Do they want anonymity or affirmation? And that contradiction, that emotional tug-of-war, is precisely what the palace is exploiting. Because the firm knows something Meghan never expected. You can't win both narratives. Either you're in or you're out. And Meghan? She's been trying to play both sides. But now, the palace has forced her hand. By removing Archie and Lilibet from official records, by treating them not as His Royal Highness and Her Royal Highness, but as private children of private citizens, the monarchy has declared, you made your choice. This is the cost. And yet, there's a cost for the palace, too. Because in their effort to protect the crown, they've risked becoming the villains of their own story. The institution that once stood for stability now stands accused of pettiness, of erasing toddlers, of punishing children for the decisions of their parents. And in a modern world, that's a PR disaster waiting to happen. Already, social media has begun to turn. Why are Harry and Meghan's kids being excluded? Why punish Archie and Lilibet for wanting a peaceful life? Is this about race? The same questions Meghan raised in that infamous Oprah interview are coming back. Louder, sharper. This time, with receipts. Because now, we have the memo. The clause. The deliberate omissions. The palace can no longer hide behind tradition. The public sees the strategy. And Meghan? She's seizing it. Because even as the palace tightens its grip, Meghan is crafting her response. A mother. A brand. A narrative. And she's just getting started. Because what the firm failed to anticipate was that Meghan's next move wouldn't be reactive. It would be global. A platform. A campaign. And a call to action that would use every tool at her disposal, from celebrity allies to media producers, from strategic op-eds to viral social posts, to tell the world. This is what the monarchy does when you don't play by their rules. But behind all the branding, behind all the strategy, there's still a mother. One who's watching her children's future shrink, one protocol at a time. And as she stares down the crown once again, she knows. She's not just fighting for titles. She's fighting for their place in history. But as she prepares to launch her counterattack, someone else is watching. Someone inside the palace. And they're not finished yet. Because they've just found another clause, one Meghan never knew existed. And when it surfaces, it won't just rewrite the rules. It will rewrite the past. They say the royal family never leaks, that everything is sealed tight behind ancient gates, guarded by men in suits and centuries of silence. But someone inside those gates cracked. Because not long after Meghan Markle received the now infamous protocol memo, not long after the world got wind of Clause 7.3 and the quiet erasure of Archie and Lilibet, a new question began to swirl. A darker question. Who leaked it? And more importantly, why? Because this wasn't a tabloid scoop. This wasn't idle gossip whispered by a driver or overheard by a tourist in Kensington. This was a classified internal document, composed by senior palace legal advisors, approved by the king himself, and meant to remain locked in the vaults of Windsor. Instead, it was in the inbox of a London journalist by sunrise. So who did it? At first, fingers pointed to Meghan's side. After all, it wouldn't be the first time she'd used controlled leaks to shape a narrative. Her inner circle has been known to work hand-in-hand with friendly reporters, sliding just enough detail to spark outrage without violating legal boundaries. But this time, it didn't fit, because Meghan was shocked by the memo. She hadn't anticipated Clause 7.3. She wasn't prepared. The timing of her team's reaction, the panic, the rushed strategy meetings, the temporary press silence, all suggested genuine surprise. And that changed everything. Because if the leak didn't come from Meghan's team, it had to come from inside the palace. Let that sink in. Someone, behind the velvet curtains, beneath the coats of arms, deliberately risked their entire royal career to get that memo out. But why? Theories began swirling. Was it revenge? A protest? A warning? The first theory points to a disgruntled staffer, someone who'd grown disillusioned with the monarchy's handling of Harry and Meghan's departure. An aide who saw the quiet erasure of Archie and Lilibet not as protocol, but as cruelty. According to one palace insider, the staff environment had grown tense in the weeks leading up to the memo's leak. Departments were being siloed. Communications were strictly monitored. Senior aides were reportedly operating under verbal-only instructions to avoid digital trails. That kind of secrecy, that kind of fear, it breeds rebellion. And rebellion, in the royal family, never comes with loud protest. It comes with whispers. So what if this staffer, positioned just closely enough to read the memo, but far enough down the ladder to feel powerless, decided to act? What if they believed the world deserved to know what the monarchy was really doing? To Meghan, to Harry, to two children whose only crime was being born into the wrong side of the family. Now here's where it gets even more twisted. Because a second theory? It points to a very different source. Not a rebel, but a loyalist. Someone who wanted the memo leaked not to protect Meghan, but to hurt her. Think about it. What better way to smoke her out? Leak just enough to enrage her fan base. Spark speculation. Force her to respond emotionally, rashly, in a way that could be used against her later. Because if Meghan's counterattack is perceived as overly aggressive, ungrateful, or calculated, the palace wins the narrative war. In chess, It's called provoking a sacrifice. Force your opponent to strike first, then call them the villain. And that's exactly what some believe this leak was. Not sabotage, but strategy. A psychological play to push Meghan into the public arena too soon. To make her fire her shots before she seized the whole board. And Meghan? She took the bait. According to sources close to her communications team, within 24 hours of the leak, they were already planning a controlled media drop, an interview with a friendly U.S. journalist, perhaps even a clip package reframing the story in emotional tones. A mother under siege, modern exile, what the palace doesn't want you to see. But just as those plans were taking shape, another leak hit. And this time, it didn't come from Meghan, or her allies, or even from a random staffer. It came from someone deep inside the firm. Someone who knew things only the inner circle could know. We're talking calendar dates, protocols not yet released, and a line-by-line preview of the next phase of the palace's strategy, including a confidential plan to phase Meghan's Duchess title out of international diplomatic acknowledgements. Let's be clear, that's not something an assistant could access. That's not something a PR intern could guess. That level of detail comes from the top, and that's when a new theory emerged, one that sent shockwaves through both Windsor and Montecito. What if the leaker was not a staffer at all? What if the leak came from a member of the family, a lesser royal, a distant cousin, a figure often forgotten by the public, but still deeply embedded in the day-to-day operations of the crown? Someone with enough resentment toward the Sussexes to want them punished, but just enough sympathy to feel conflicted about the children's involvement. It sounds outrageous, until you remember one thing. The royal family eats its own, just politely. And if there's one thing the monarchy despises more than scandal, it's exposure. Because the palace can withstand criticism. It can survive gossip. But what it cannot tolerate, what it has never tolerated, is losing control of the narrative. And the leak of this memo was a nuclear breach of that control. Already, security protocols have allegedly been tightened. Access logs reviewed. Phones audited. Meeting rooms swept for recording devices. Trust is evaporating inside the palace walls. Staffers are whispering. Royals are side-eyeing each other. The firm is closing in. But here's the catch. The leaker isn't panicking. In fact, they might be planning more. According to an anonymous, encrypted source who contacted a prominent UK journalist with verified attachments, there's another document. A second file. Not a memo. Not a protocol. But a private message thread between two senior palace aides, allegedly discussing Meghan in brutally personal terms. Terms that could destroy the crown's public claims of neutrality. Terms that suggest prejudice, strategy, and a coordinated campaign of public erasure. And this file might drop any day now. So ask yourself, what happens if the public sees the real face of the monarchy? Not the polished balcony waves, but the secret chats, the jokes, the strategy sessions on how to handle the problem from Montecito. And what if that leak reveals something even more explosive? What if it exposes a deal? A private understanding between two senior royals to deny Archie and Lilibet their rightful titles in exchange for political favor, institutional preservation, or even media silence. Because the monarchy doesn't just operate on tradition. It operates on transactions. And somewhere, buried beneath centuries of privilege, is the deal that turned this family feud into a systemic campaign. That's what the leaker wants the world to see. That's what Meghan never expected. Because she thought the battle was about titles. She thought it was about brand identity and public perception. But what she's about to learn is that this fight is far deeper. And the person leaking these documents, they're not just a traitor. They're a witness. And the next file they release won't just rattle Buckingham Palace. It will reveal the name of the person who ordered Clause 7.3 in the first place. And when that name drops, everything and everyone will burn. You could feel it. The silence, the sudden shift in tone, the invitations that stopped coming, the brand deals that never followed up, the red carpets where her name was missing. Because just days after the palace memo leaked, and Clause 7.3 began circulating like wildfire, the ripple effect slammed straight into Meghan Markle's most carefully protected arena, Hollywood. And here's the brutal truth that no one in her inner circle wanted to admit. The very same industry that once embraced Meghan as the fresh, rebellious, globally conscious Duchess of Hollywood was now quietly pulling away. And the reason? Fear, not of Meghan herself, but of association. Because in the entertainment world, image is currency. And right now, Meghan's was becoming dangerously expensive. Let's start with the whispers. Within 72 hours of the memo's leak, insiders at 3 major agencies, talent, branding, and publishing, allegedly received discreet alerts. Review any public-facing content involving the Duchess of Sussex. Confirm clarity around title usage. Cross-check compliance with UK legal frameworks. In short, stop the presses. If you're working with Meghan, pause. If you're featuring Meghan, rethink. If you're selling Meghan, lawyer up. Because while Meghan was scrambling to shape her response, Hollywood was doing what Hollywood does best, protecting itself. Let's talk specifics. One of the first signs came from a well-known luxury brand, rumored to be exploring a limited edition capsule collection with Meghan tied to wellness, sustainability, and modern Duchess elegance. The mood board was built. The mock-ups were done. A pre-launch concept had even been shared with select VIP clients. Then came the memo. Within hours of Clause 7.3 surfacing, the campaign was quietly shelved. Why? Because the brand had planned to market Meghan as the Duchess of Sussex, a title now under legal dispute, surrounded by international scrutiny, and smeared with whispers of royal retaliation. To proceed would risk a diplomatic PR nightmare. And for a brand built on image, that's death. Then came the Netflix issue. For months, Meghan's camp had been floating a series concept, light docudrama meets family diary, allegedly designed to explore themes of parenting, legacy, and modern royalty. At first, Netflix was interested. Meetings were held. Concepts approved. But then, silence. According to a source close to Netflix's upper content division, executives grew nervous after the memo leak, specifically the part about unauthorized royal styling in media content. One line in particular reportedly spooked the lawyers. Ongoing representation of dormant royal titles in commercial formats may be deemed misleading by formal authorities. Misleading. That's all it took. Because misleading equals lawsuits. Lawsuits equal headlines. Headlines equal risk. So the project? On hold. Not canceled. Not yet. But indefinitely suspended, pending legal clarification. And that was just the start. Spotify? Still radioactive after the Archetypes implosion. Penguin Random House. Cautious. Brand partners? Retreating. Even the parade. Yes, the parade. The Hollywood Christmas parade. The glitzy, nostalgia-fueled pageant of floats and flashing lights that had allegedly invited Meghan for a surprise guest appearance. According to insiders, Meghan was to ride solo, radiant in a signature trench, waving to fans, reintroducing herself to the American public as a beloved public figure, no longer royal, but still relevant. It would have been the perfect comeback moment. But after the palace memo leaked, the invitation was quietly rescinded. The official excuse? Scheduling conflicts. The real reason? Panic. Because if Meghan rode that float while calling herself the Duchess of Sussex, and the palace chose to respond, the parade would be the headline. Not the charities. Not the children. Not the celebration. Just Meghan. Just another Meghan controversy. And they weren't willing to take that risk. But perhaps the most painful fallout came from Meghan's inner circle. Not staff. Not publicists. But friends. A-list friends. Activist friends. Royal-adjacent allies who once championed her story, reposted her launches, and defended her against every critic. They began to disappear. No tweets. No reposts. No shout-outs. No public support. Nothing. Because here's the part of celebrity life no one wants to admit. Support has an expiration date. Solidarity has PR conditions. And the moment a public figure becomes more liability than legend, their network doesn't stand by. It stands back. And Meghan was now radioactive. Behind the scenes, crisis meetings began. Her team allegedly attempted to reframe the narrative, repackage Meghan not as the Duchess, but as a woman caught in the crosshairs of institutional power. The goal? To pivot, away from royalty, toward resilience, away from titles, toward motherhood, away from the firm, toward female empowerment. But it was too late. The damage was already done. Because the leak of Clause 7.3 didn't just tarnish Meghan's brand. It detonated it. And not because people believed she had done something wrong, but because no one wanted to be caught in the blast radius. And yet, through all of this, Meghan remained silent. No Instagram posts, no glossy photos, no press statements, no emotional podcast monologues. Just silence. Strategic silence. But not for long. Because behind the scenes, something else was brewing. A new brand, stripped of royal styling, free of duchess trimmings, built on a new identity. Modern, motherly, mission-driven, allegedly called M. Just M. A single letter. Elegant, defiant, universal. Sources claim it's already in motion. Websites registered, logos trademarked, interviews planned. A pivot, a rebirth, one that makes no reference to titles, yet leaves no doubt who's behind it. Because Meghan's play now is to let the palace strip the title and then rise without it. A phoenix act. Let them take the crown.